Okay, all right, everybody get comfortable. We're going to go ahead and get started. So officially, welcome. This is our third town hall meeting brought to you by Northern Virginia Family Practice. We are calling this town hall series Be Well Virginia. So we're focusing on connecting with people and making sure that we are staying in touch with you and your medical needs during this crazy time that we're all experiencing. I am Dr. Cecily Hubbard. I am a family medicine doctor. I have been working at Northern Virginia Family Practice now for about 10 months. It's been a wonderful transition to this practice. I'm so grateful to be given all the opportunities here that I have. I'm also very excited to be part of this town hall series. So today's town hall discussion is going to be about mental health in the age of COVID. So, and we have some fantastic speakers that we've recruited to talk a little bit about this, and I'll be introducing them in a minute here. However, first, a couple of housekeeping issues here in Northern Virginia Family Practice. So first of all, you guys are amazing. All of the questions that we've been getting before the town hall meetings, after the town hall meetings, it's phenomenal. We've all had to go back and do our research and just love your questions. And we really do want to answer as many of them as we can, all of them we really want to answer. However, we're finding that it's not possible to get to every question at these meetings. So what we are planning to do is actually create a Q&A blog. So keep those questions coming in. If questions develop after this town hall today, please send in questions. We're going to be incorporating them into a blog that's going to be available on our website. So all of your questions will be answered, whether they're in town hall form or in the blog form, but we'll get to them. And one of the big questions that we've been getting, especially this week, that I wanted to address really quickly is the question about antibody testing. So it's true, Northern Virginia Family Practice, working with Quest, we do have this testing available. However, I really want to stress with you that this testing that we have is sort of the first gen, or as my son would call it, testing 1.0 in terms of antibody testing. And it's very, very limited. For example, doing this testing can't even really definitively tell you whether or not you've had COVID, which is really what we all want to know. It also can't definitively tell you if you have immunity to COVID, which is also something that's very important. But these are some of the limitations. There will be better antibody testing, I think, down the road, but right now this is what we've got. If you are interested in having this testing done, we are recommending that everybody do a telemedicine visit with us. So schedule that appointment, talk to us, ask us questions, we'll tell you what we know, and also make sure that that everyone understands the limitations of this testing. Last but not least, as everyone knows, we will be moving, okay? And so the COVID has not been able to stop this. We have a moving date. It will officially be May 15th, that's a Friday. The office will be physically moving that day, so we will not be in the office that day. The lab will not be open, so just make a note of that. However, the providers will be available by telemedicine, so we will be accessible in that way. And if you have any needs that come up on May 15th, you can get in touch with us. So we will be starting to see patients the following week in the new office. And whether it's via telemedicine, potentially even bringing some patients back, we'll get back to that in a later part of this meeting. But we're excited to show everybody around, maybe do some virtual tours in the first couple of weeks, and introduce you to the new place. Okay, so moving on to the main event. As I've alluded to before, and as we all know, COVID has turned our lives upside down. There's really not any part of our life that hasn't been affected by this pandemic in some way. And our mental health has taken a toll. A lot of people, more than others. And I am thrilled to introduce two speakers, two professionals, mental health professionals here in the area who have I had the pleasure to work with over the years, and they agreed to come on to our town hall today and give us a little bit of insight into this. So let me introduce you first of all, and when I say their names, in wave. So first we have Robyn Brickel. She is down there. Robyn Brickel is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a special interest in treating trauma survivors. She has over 20 years of experience providing psychotherapy, and she's the founder and clinical director of Brickel and Associates in Old Town Alexandria. She provides treatment for adolescents and adults, as well as couples and families, focuses on mood disorders, addiction, trauma, self-harm, eating disorders, perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, and other mental health conditions. She's deeply committed to clinical practice, professional education, and better public awareness of mental health issues. Robyn is also a writer who regularly blogs about trauma and trauma-informed care. So you can check out her website for more information for that. And moving on, our next guest is Dr. Jennifer Santoro. So she can wave, there she is. So Dr. Santoro is a board-certified psychiatrist who has been in private practice in Fairfax, Virginia for the last 15 years. She attended college at Cornell University and then medical school at the University of Rochester. Dr. Santoro focuses her practice on general adult psychiatry with an interest also in women's mental health, and has developed another special interest in treating PTSD patients during her psychiatry residency in New York City during 9/11. She completed a fellowship in medical psychiatric liaison consultation at George Washington University, and also holds voluntary faculty positions with George Washington and Virginia Commonwealth Universities. Dr. Santoro has been given the distinguished designation as top doctor in the Washingtonian magazine for the last 4 years in a row, which speaks very highly to her respect within the medical community. So with no further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. So hello, Robyn.
Hello.
Dr. Santoro, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
Okay, so we had some questions come in from patients, but there's also lots of different topics I think that we can discuss. So I guess we'll just go ahead and dive right in. I'm going to direct this question at Dr. Santoro. What are some of the emotions that are emerging in the wake of this pandemic? What are you seeing in your practice?
So we're seeing a bit of everything. We see, understandably, fear, trepidation, anxiety, a lot of helplessness, right? People don't feel like they know what to do, how to protect themselves, or they try to protect themselves and they're not sure if it's effective because there's all different messages we're getting from different sources. Emotions like isolation, loneliness, loss, feeling overwhelmed with managing life, at home with everybody in the house, or feeling isolated at home, maybe alone. There's some people, honestly, who, on the flip side, it's normal to even feel some relief. Some of my patients are sort of feeling guilty that their life is easier. They don't have to commute, maybe. They don't have to schlep their kids to all different activities. So there's some relief in life being a little bit simpler, and then guilt about feeling that way when other people are struggling. So we are seeing the gamut. Of course, the most common stuff we see is anxiety. And sometimes anxiety means that we feel like we have lots of energy to do things, like anxious energy, anxiety, where people try to get tons of stuff done and channel it into being almost overly productive. And then some people, when they're anxious, just depending on who you are in your situation, feel overwhelmed and shut down and freeze. And some people, when they're anxious, kind of want to run away, and it's hard because there's not a lot of places to go. So I'd say that kind of runs the gamut of what we see. And we're working really hard to encourage people to, honestly give themselves permission to feel all of that, because it's normal, and to do self-care, which we'll talk a lot more about in other parts of our session. and to feel okay with admitting all of these emotions, being vulnerable, getting support. So
thank you. Thank you. Robyn, anything else that you can add? I think that Dr. Santoro did a fantastic job of launching us into this.
She pretty much covered everything. The only piece that I will also add is that every feeling that people feel is normal. So whether it's anxiety, but also depression, I'm seeing a lot of people who are also feeling depressed with what's going on, feeling like their life is changing. They have zero control. So the anxiety and the depression go together, that fight, flight, freeze kind of response to trauma that happens for everybody. And so figuring out just how they're feeling, noticing that and accepting it, that we're all in an unprecedented time, that there's no right or wrong feeling here.
And so Robyn, how do you manage these feelings? Because I think that's, so we recognize that they're happening, but now we're dealt with what to do with them. And do you have any recommendations about coping mechanisms or something that we can do to help manage some of these emotions?
Yeah, I think the biggest pieces of what we can do are the best self-care that's possible. I talk a lot about that. We all talk a lot about that every day. And it really is about making sure you're taking care of your even basic needs, getting enough sleep, doing good sleep hygiene, doing good physical hygiene, right? Making sure you're getting up, you're showering, you're getting dressed, you're getting up at a certain time, you're going to sleep around the same time, waking up. So eating fairly healthy, right? Getting some movement, some connection. I think managing the anxiety, the depression, whatever emotions are showing up requires that self-compassion. So the ability to understand that we're all doing the best we can and that this is not easy and that nobody is alone in having some kind of response to this. It is very, it is common for everyone. We're all having some response, and how we're managing it, how we're handling it, and how we're best taking care of ourselves. So.
And Robyn, you mentioned sleep as something that we should try to regulate or get enough of. Mm-hmm. And there have been, I've had patients who are complaining that that sleep is very difficult for them right now. And Dr. Santoro, I was wondering if you have any strategies or any insight into treating sleep disorders during this time.
So first of all, to say, Cecily, that I'm hearing what you're hearing. I don't know what our audience is experiencing, but I almost was surprised as things shifted in terms of our treatment during this crazy time that the most common complaint I'm hearing is sleep disturbance. So even people who, know how to take care of themselves, they have good sleep hygiene usually, people are having trouble sleeping. And so to back up 2 steps, we've talked a lot about this, my colleagues and I in psychiatry and in primary care and the therapists we love. And we think it's a few different things. One is we're all more anxious, right? So anxiety makes our sleep lighter. And so that's probably a piece of it. Anxiety gives us vivid dreams, which makes our sleep lighter, right? We're more likely to wake up from a vivid dream. There's some of that. I think some pieces of the difficulty sleeping could be, depending on your story and your lifestyle, could be changes in your schedule, right? So, you can't expect to go to sleep at your usual 11 o'clock time when you're giving yourself permission to sleep in. So irregular sleep schedules, because we don't have our, outside stimulation the same as normal. And then one other big piece, I think, to understanding this is that we all, as we're doing right now, we all are on screens a lot of the day now, right? So we're working on screens. We're trying to stay in touch with family and friends on screens. For those of you who don't know some of the background with this, Our screens, which are phenomenal devices and permit us to stay connected and see people. The light they emanate is blue light. And so if you haven't heard that term before, I would suggest you write it down and look it up. So blue light from screens is a bright wavelength of light that actually simulates early morning light, which sends messages to our brain that it's early in the day when we're looking at a screen, particularly anything that we look at that's close to us. So, you know, years ago with sleep hygiene, we used to worry about everyone watching TV in bed. I mean, now that's like the least of our problems. We worry a lot more about everybody on their tablets, on their smartphones, on their laptops, close to our face, blue light. So that can disrupt our circadian rhythm and make it hard to fall asleep. So a recommendation we have based on that for people is for at least 2 hours before bed, try to get yourself off of screens. So, you know, the sleep hygiene piece with regular schedule, pick a regular bedtime, try to choose a regular wake time, try to hold yourself to that plus or minus an hour. And then really try to look back and think like, I need to get off my devices a couple of hours before bed, do things that, you know, you can listen to an audiobook, you can listen to podcasts, you can listen to music, you can talk on the phone with a friend, you can, you know, take a warm shower, a warm bath to help yourself relax. You could do some stretching, deep breathing, mindfulness, but try to get off a screen. A book is okay. So, you know, if you need to wind down with a book, we would say read a book, but try to read a book like a paper book with a dim ambient light instead of reading something on a tablet or smartphone. So sometimes those things really help. And then the regular schedule and we'll come back around to this, but some activity during the day. So I think we're also more sedentary because of what's going on now. And so trying to feel like, you know, in ways that feel safe to you, get some exercise. There's plenty of things that you could do early in the day on your devices where there's, you know, YouTube classes, exercise classes you could take, but just getting out, nature's good for our mental health. Go for a walk outside, you know, move in ways that you feel comfortable. So I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add to that, Robyn.
I think you covered everything pretty well. That I don't know that there are so many more pieces to this other than, again, I'm just going to repeat the idea of the best self-care, the best way that you can be compassionate to yourself with regard to taking care of your sleep, taking care of yourself, that you're managing a lot. So not beating up on yourself, not criticizing yourself, just really understanding that you're doing the best that you can.
You know what? Can I add one more thing? Sorry.
Of course, please.
Going back to thinking about the screens, for those of you who would like to use your screen later in the day or have to use your screen because of your job later in the day, there are blue light blocking either apps you can install or glasses you can order and wear, or even like a thin film you can put over your screen. That's like a physical thing. So look into those if you need to get on your device in the evening.
So yeah, great advice. Yeah, and so the other thing that you alluded to was getting out, exercising, being active. And one thing that's all very, very important, but one thing that we're also dealing with is this idea of isolation. So a lot of us maybe can't get outside for whatever reason. And so we, you know, there's the physical isolation as well as somewhat the social isolation. And I was wondering, Robyn, if you could speak a little bit towards maybe some of the loneliness that we're starting to feel. We feel very maybe distant from one another. And this can be very, very difficult, especially in a time of high anxiety and grief. Usually we like to come together during times like this, but it seems like with this situation with the pandemic and this isolation that we're doing, it's actually keeping us apart. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about some of the loneliness and some of the difficulties in this.
Absolutely. I think that number one, I've changed my language around this. So I don't call it social distancing. I call it physical distancing.
Yep.
So that at least we are changing the way we can view it and think about it, that we really actually need to be more socially connected because we are so physically distanced. And even just changing the language allows us to think about it a little bit differently. I think for for my clients, for the people who know me, they know that I'm so not tech happy. I really feel like under normal circumstances, text, phone, even phone, but definitely text and email are not great modes of communication, especially for emotional things. And so I have really had to kind of eat my words a little bit about this, because this is the best we have right now. So the best we have right now is to look around and see, at least from my screen, it says that there's 91 people here. There's 91 people who are with us together. So I think it's so important to remember that we are absolutely not socially disconnected. We are not socially distanced. We are all together and feeling this at the same time and dealing with it and coping with it. And I think, right, the loneliness comes. It comes for everybody, whether you live with someone, whether you live alone, the idea of needing to connect with people. I usually, right, see 10 to 15 people a day. I have a lot of contact with people. And so the idea that that's not happening is really hard for some people. The loneliness, right, who they can connect with, the physical touch, all of those things are so hard. And so I'm going to sound like a broken record, but having some compassion for yourself that it is really hard, and that the best way we can stay connected is to be on the phone, to be on these virtual calls or meetings, to be able to text, to be able to stay connected to the people you love, you care about. I make a recommendation to everybody that they connect with at least one, if not 2 or 3 people every day, so that there's some connection to the outside world. And if you have the ability and you feel safe to go outside and even wave to your neighbor from your driveway or from the other side of the road, so that you can at least see another human being, smile, connect. There's so much that's involved in feeling connected. There's a lot of thoughts that depression and anxiety, if not created, are exacerbated by feeling disconnected. And so the more connection we have, the more we can take care of ourselves and take care of that anxiety and depression that are showing up.
That's great advice. Thank you, Robyn. Not moving in a slightly different direction. I don't mean I don't want to generalize at all, but I'm finding that that women and men might be experiencing this a little bit differently, and there's some unique experiences that women are having and maybe struggling a little bit more in certain circumstances. And Dr. Santoro, I thought that I'd start with you just to maybe speak a little bit about what might be unique about maybe a woman's experience who's going through this situation.
So we'll be promise men in our audience not to generalize about this. And just, my husband would right now be yelling at me. I'm out of the house in my office and with our school-age children, figuring out how to negotiate what's going on with the academic world. So I think it depends on the family and the family circumstances, but the reality is, my peer group, most women are still primary caregivers for their children. Some women are stay-at-home moms, some women work outside the home. Right now, a lot of people are trying to work from home and still be parents, right? And be home with their children, or they might be they might be helping take care of an elderly relative, family member. So women are often sandwiched, right, between the younger generation and the older generation. They, in our society, more than half of women work outside the home, but even if they don't, women who work in the home now are working in the home, managing their relationships, because we take it on ourselves often as women to take care of everybody else, particularly their children. And there's less breaks from that. It's harder to keep people busy when we're stuck in, the confines of our house or our apartment. We are feeling a lot of pressure to keep everybody happy and entertained, where women are feeling a lot of pressure to, provide healthy meals and take care of people's bodies at least, during this experience, and coming up with exercise ideas for people in the family. And women tend, in general, to be more worried about, and this is an overgeneralization, but women tend to be more worried about relationships and managing the relationship. So I think all of that can put more pressure on women. Flip side is there certainly are some dynamics, many dynamics in families where that's true for the husband or for the men in the relationships. So, I think that can put a lot of pressure on people. I think, this comes back to a lot of what we're saying, which is, what do we do about that? We try to be kind to each other. We try to ask support from our significant others. We might need to think of ways to ask for help that we don't normally ask for help, right? We might need to let things go. So, like our houses are just not going to be as clean as they normally are when we're in them all the time. And to obsess about that at the expense of maybe doing something that would be more restorative, like going outside and going for a walk or getting on a call with a couple of friends. I would recommend the latter, not the former, right? Let some of the stuff go in the house, be okay with things not being in perfect order all the time, or maybe being a bit of a mess once in a while. Being kind to ourselves about I'm all for healthy nutrition. I know I feel very strongly that a decent, healthy diet is good for our mental health. And so that is certainly important, but it doesn't have to be perfect all the time either. And so I always say to my family, it's on average what you eat over the course of the week. So you want it to be healthy kind of overall when you look at the whole week, but that permits us to have some less healthy days or half days where, maybe it's a lot of cheese and bread or whatever, your food of choice is. So being a little bit kinder to ourselves and more relaxed about things, and being flexible, which can be really hard. So I don't know if there.
Yeah, flexibility can be hard. I mean, I hear you saying this. It's almost like we have to lower our expectations a little bit to forgive ourselves and allow ourselves to be a little bit less in control of the situation, and that can be a hard thing to do. Robyn, could you speak a little bit to, just so we give the men in the audience and in general a little bit of a little bit of airtime here? Can you speak at all to some unique experiences that they might be experiencing?
Yeah, so I see both men and women in my practice, and some of the men are experiencing the idea that men are supposed to be strong, have no emotion, not supposed to be scared or cry or be upset. And I really think that that does men a disservice to follow these old social norms. I really enjoy the writing of someone named Dan Griffin. He wrote a couple of books, and he does some podcasts about man rules and why you should or why you might not need to follow them. Men have emotion and they are allowed to be able to cry and emote, and we as women need to be able to make space for them to do that. And so when I saw him speak, he was so dynamic and phenomenal. I wrote an article about him, and what he brings to the table, because I think men do not always get or take the space that they need emotionally to take care of their mental health. And they are just as important as women. So I will absolutely say that. I will think that. And they are doing a lot of hard work as well. At least in my house, my husband has done quite a bit, especially with my tech drama lately. So I definitely cannot leave him out.
Yeah, I'm going to have to give big props to my husband too, who, especially being in healthcare right now, my attention has been elsewhere, and he's really taken on a lot with the kids and making sure that the household is still standing upright. So, and then that's a good segue, actually. What about our kids? We've had questions. I've had patients ask me, well, how should I talk to my kids? what should I tell them? Should, you know, we have this feeling sometimes that we have to be strong, we have to protect them and don't show, you know, any sign of weakness at all. But is this how do you feel about that, Dr. Santoro? Is that something that, actually, no, we were going to talk to Robyn about this. Sorry, Robyn, how do you feel about that at all? Sorry. Well, I mean, Dr. Santoro, you can answer too, but let's try to keep things.
It's totally fine. As you know, Dr. Santoro and I work together a lot, so we have a lot of similar conversations. I think it's really important to take your own personal child into consideration, right? You know what your children can handle, what they can deal with, and there is a spectrum of abilities, emotional capabilities to be able to handle this. So we need to really individualize this. Generally speaking, I'm a big fan of being honest and authentic within range, right? Within what they can handle, within what questions they're asking, so that we're not giving too much information, more information than they need or want, but to be able to stay with them. I think that it's okay to show them that we're a little anxious. This is a little unprecedented. This is odd. And we're all going to be, they are going to be okay, because as parents, it's a parent's job to take care of their children, and they're, you know, all of the people here, everyone's going to take care of their children, right? So they are going to be safe because they have you. I think there's a lot of resources out there, books and articles. Sesame Street was on CNN the other night. It was pretty spectacular about how to deal with the emotions that kids are feeling, how to be able to explain COVID to children. I have a ton of resources that I've built. My team built a COVID resource page on my website. And so on there is everything possible that I could find that was free. And there's a few books on there about how to explain coronavirus to kids, so that you have some foundation to start with. I really do think being authentic and honest and answering their questions is important. Dr. Santoro, do you have any more to add?
There is a resource that maybe is probably on your site. If it isn't, I can have you add it, childmind.org. They are run by a child psychiatrist. It's a nonprofit. They blog and post about all sorts of, you know, difficulties, normal spectrum to mental health issue spectrum with children. And they've covered this topic about how to talk about this with your kids, how to deal with kids' anxiety about COVID, you know, where, as Robyn's saying, you know, how much information to give to kids at different developmental stages and phases, keeping in mind your own individual child's tendencies. So it's a great resource, childmind.org.
Great. Great, thank you. So speaking of all the information that's floating around out there, it can be a little overwhelming because we you know, we're bombarded. We've got TV, we've got social media, we've got you know, just pretty much everything. So we've got a lot of information coming at us. How do we balance that? How do we not feel overwhelmed by all the information that's out there? Dr. Santoro, can you answer that? Yeah.
So we all feel it, right? And I know we have a savvy audience, so I suspect you've probably figured some of this out by now. But you know, what we're really recommending to people is not to let yourself be bombarded as much as you can control it. There's too much, it's constant. I mean, literally, like, you know, you wake up every morning, it's like, what's going on? I open the, you know, front page, at least I read it on my phone, of a couple of newspapers, and it's like everything COVID, right? So I appreciate that we don't want our head in the sand. We want to have some idea of what's going on, but I would really recommend limiting the amount of media exposure to something reasonable. So maybe like 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes in the evening, pick a couple of reliable sources that you feel comfortable with. I recommend reading rather than watching. So all of the news programming and people talking can sometimes feel very overstimulating and overwhelming. So when you read it, you can read at your own pace, in your head, in your internal voice, instead of, the anxiety in other people's voices. So I'd recommend sort of picking a couple of sources and limiting your exposure in that way. For people who are really, really tied to their devices and it's pinging you constantly, like even though I've tried to shut some of mine off, if I look at my phone, like the newspapers I subscribe to, like will constantly alert me. And so I'd rather recommend shutting off these alerts because they're not helpful. I would consider taking off things. I don't know what your favorite is, but take off Instagram, take off Twitter, take off the stuff that's constantly pinging you, take it off your phone so you're not constantly looking at it. And if you want to look at it, that's in your 30 minutes of time twice a day, and you look at it, on a web browser on your computer or something, just so that you're not constantly getting alerts. I think it's also okay in this news media overstimulation world that we experience, some people in our lives are healthier to talk about this stuff with than others. Some people tend to be anxious and obsessive, and they focus on like horrible stories because, of course, there are always horrible stories. And so does the media, so does the news. So it's okay to say to people in your lives like, oh, that is not a conversation I feel like having right now, or these are, certain people in our lives we don't engage in conversations about COVID. We talk about other things with because maybe the way they talk about it makes us anxious. So I'd encourage you to recognize some of that and set some healthy boundaries, pick the healthy people to talk about things with.
Yeah, and one of the questions that came in from our patients here is, at Northern Virginia Family Practice, where do we get our information? What do we like to follow? And and we are continuing to mostly follow the scientific sites. We follow the CDC, and then we also get almost daily alerts from Virginia Department of Health. So those are some sites, as well as the hospitals. We do like to check in with the hospitals and see what the daily tallies are for people that are hospitalized. So that's where we're getting our information as healthcare providers. So just wanted to answer that. So Robyn, I wanted to direct the next question towards you. It seems like everybody is having a slightly different experience with this, and it seems like sometimes some people are doing okay, and maybe some people are not, and some people really sort of wonder, I'm really struggling. Why does it seem like other people are doing okay with this? Is there any way to reconcile that, or how should we think about that phenomenon?
So I think there's a couple of really important pieces about that. One of which is some people look like they're handling it okay on the outside, and on the inside, they may be feeling very differently. Some people have the ability to regulate themselves outwardly in a way that just keeps them very balanced looking, etc. And so just because you're not seeing it doesn't mean it's not happening. And I think that's really important. Secondly, I think that because I do a lot of work with trauma survivors and people who have had a lot of times in their life where they have had to really survive and manage horrific events in their world, I think that they also have kind of what I call survivor parts of them that have this ability to manage, to survive. They know what to do when things are not going well. They have experience managing, feeling so much anxiety or depression. And so sometimes that shows up as well. Those survivor parts take over, and they have this ability to just do what needs to be done from a place that maybe is seems a little bit less emotionally connected. I also think that for some people who have been through really horrific events in their life, this feels less, right? They may be safe at times where they haven't been safe in the past, like in abusive relationships, domestic violence, etc. They're able to stay home. Some people feel better at home. They don't have to go to work. They're not struggling with the interactions of the people they work with. They're not having a long commute. They're not dealing with some of those things. Some things are a little bit easier. They're not dealing with their insecurities of being with other people. So I think that we are all individualized. I genuinely believe there's not one person on the planet who is not impacted by this somehow, some way, and they are just doing the best they can. Everyone, we all are doing the best we can to cope, and some people's coping skills just look different than others.
Yeah, and you know, along those lines, you know, I've had patients and even friends of mine just say that, you know, I'm trying to hold on to my routines, and you know, I'm keeping myself as busy as possible, but it's actually causing just a lot of stress. And why, you know, why is this? You know, we're trying so hard to keep our routines together. I mean, that should alleviate our stress, right? We just keep moving on like normal, like nothing's happened, right? That should alleviate our stress, but actually it's resulting in a lot more stress. Dr. Santoro, could you talk to that a little bit?
Sure, right? I mean, we're Northern Virginia. Broader than that practice, I don't know, but you know, people generally have busy lives, good coping skills, are used to keeping themselves busy, are sometimes trying to cope that way, which can be a useful thing, but we also need to remember to be kind to ourselves. We've said this so many times, I'm sure our audience is tired of hearing it, but I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. Like, you know, one of the things sometimes I'm hearing is people are like completely exhausting themselves because, okay, I'm home and, you know, things are quiet and maybe it's hard for me to work from home, or, you know, some people are stressed because they can't work from home, and they're feeling like, okay, now is the time that I'm going to reorganize every closet in my house, and it's going to be perfect, and it's going to look like a magazine. And yes, and you know, that's like, in small ways can be very gratifying, but can be you can put a lot of pressure on yourself to have everything organized, everything in perfect order, you know, rigid with the routine or schedules, right? So I think we just need to be flexible. I, you know, encourage people to, they want to get something like that done, you know, and it feels good, not to overdo it, right? Like sometimes it helps to even put a timer on, you know, get started, get really into it. Most of us can sustain an activity with really good focus if we're feeling generally well for an hour or less. And after an hour, there's some sense of depletion and we need to recharge a little bit. So even if you've got these projects going, like take a break every 10 minutes, listen to the birds, like open the windows, step outside, slow down. So slow down, giving ourselves permission to relax a little bit. You know, it's this balance, right? Like not too much structure, not over scheduling and trying to keep yourself too busy with every project that you haven't done in the house. And yet not, you know, not getting so out of routine that you're spending half the day in your pajamas and starting to feel like lethargic and depressed.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's almost a distraction. We introduce those activities to distract us from what might be going on. And, you know, and sometimes we like to feel like it's just business as usual, like there's nothing that's different. And then, right. But then I think you start to realize that, no, we can't go to work. We can't go to the grocery store without a mask on anymore. And so then I think that also creates a certain level of stress that things aren't the way that they
right.
were. So
saying it is such a good idea, right? Just being able to say that, verbalize that to people around you, you know.
Yeah, being kind to ourselves, I think is important right now. And on the flip side of that, you know, what I've also seen start to happen with patients and just in general with reading is that there are some unhealthy coping mechanisms that are starting to develop. And in times of stress, that can certainly happen. And with all the stress that's going on, you know, it makes sense that would be starting to develop. Robyn, would you be able to speak a little bit to some of the unhealthy coping mechanisms and how to recognize what those are and maybe what we can do about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that even keeping too busy can be part of those coping mechanisms that can become maladaptive, right? Like that we're using that busyness as a coping skill to kind of flee from our feelings, to just not be present in the moment. And that's true of anything can be used to excess in that way, to not be in your body, to not be noticing your feelings, to not be coping or managing to feel so dysregulated, and people are using alcohol, substances, they're using food, some people are using, even exercise, everything to the nth degree can be unhealthy for us. And so really figuring out what's going on, when people are experiencing trauma or a need to cope, this fight, flight, freeze, they are looking for whatever coping skill they can to feel less badly. And so people will, they'll drink too much to not deal with the emotion, to not feel. They will eat a gallon of ice cream, so that they're just feeling the good feeling of the ice cream. They'll exercise because it gives them some sense of good feeling or control. I think that during experiences like this, I'm seeing people tend to look at some of their old coping skills, even if they've done healing around them and change around them. And so really just noticing yourself and getting grounded, being present, noticing that you can handle this, you do have that strength inside of you, right? You are able to, that these coping skills, can also harm you. So we don't want to come out of COVID with more issues than we went in that aren't COVID, right?
Very, very, very good point. So, and I think we alluded a little bit to this already, where, sometimes, some people are feeling better about being home. Maybe work was a triggering place for them. And so actually being at home is sort of a safer place, and they might feel a little bit better. But there are circumstances where the home is not necessarily a safe place for people. And Dr. Santoro, I was wondering if you could speak to this phenomenon and this observation that home is not always a safe place for everyone.
Sure. Home depends what your home is like, right? So, there's a different spectrum of home environments we live in, from the maybe more benign, but just overcrowded, depending on how many family members you have in a small space, or even a larger space, just like, getting into each other's spaces and routines can be stressful, and dealing with competing routines and competing schedules in the home can certainly add stress. If there's, kind of some level of relationship discord or conflict, more time together is sometimes not a good feeling. So that can accelerate things, especially if we're not coming from a place of sort of understanding personality differences and different needs in this COVID world we're living in terms of connectedness, stimulation, right? Introverts versus extroverts being stuck home together, to the spectrum of, if there is any sort of feeling at home that it's not safe, where there's been domestic violence, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, right? Then to be trapped in that way can accelerate feelings of anxiety, fear, not feeling safe. I have patients who, maybe have a history of an eating disorder, and then being home with maybe food that people have stockpiled in the house can make things difficult to regulate because they're not in the regular schedule and can trigger things. So home can feel unsafe and uncomfortable in lots and lots of different ways. I would remind people that there's lots of resources for this, right? So there's tons of virtual help, even if it's not your favorite way to get help, there's tons of virtual help. Most resources out there, including domestic violence groups, including, mood and anxiety disorder groups, including eating disorder groups, all have some virtual support going on, and a lot of it is free. So if you need resources and you can't find them, ask one of us and we'll help you find them. And obviously there's one-on-one resources for that too. I encourage everybody to try to take breaks. So, take breaks from the people you're in your house with, try to create a space that's just yours if you can, if you have the space to do that. If not, sometimes, for some of my patients, it means that they get in the car and they go for a drive. For some of my patients, it means they go out and go for a walk. For some, it means they use virtual media to do a meditation or a mindfulness. There's all sorts of things that are free in terms of that. For some, it's a little bit of a break and an escape in terms of cultural and other resources, again, virtually, that are free, and we can talk more about those if people need them.
So Robyn, how do we know that we might need help? I mean, we're all under a lot of stress. I think we all will admit that we have a certain degree of anxiety, but are there certain features that might indicate that we should be looking for help?
So, of course, I would say this, but there's no harm in ever asking for help, right? I think that that's part of the piece. I don't know that it always has to be professional help. I think that it can be help from your partner, it can be help from your friends, your family, to be able to talk to people, to express how you're feeling. I think one of the biggest pieces of one big indicator for asking for professional help is when your emotions, when your feelings start to get in your own way. You can't even accomplish what it is that you're trying to do. When you're really trying and practicing good sleep hygiene and you're still not able to sleep, right? You're still feeling really anxious. You can't calm your nervous system, even if you've tried lots of different things, right? Whether you've tried yoga or mindfulness, the meditation that Dr. Santoro talked about. I also think if you are in a home where there's abuse, where there's domestic violence, right? Those are definite times to ask for professional help, either the crisis hotlines, as Dr. Santoro mentioned, there are lots of them. Some of them do their communication via text or even via email, 24-hour chats, things like that. So even if you can't talk for fear that someone will hear you, you might be able to type or text to be able to help yourself get support and get help. I think those are really important things. I think that asking for help right now really needs to get the spotlight it deserves. Asking for help is courageous and it's strong and it brings resilience. It is by far not weak. It is one of the strongest things you could ever do. So
I think that's a really, really good point, because sometimes we see asking for help or feeling vulnerable as a weakness. Mm-hmm. And actually what I like to look at it as is courage, to be able to ask for help and to admit that you need it. I think that shows a lot of bravery. And so along those lines, what are some of the positives that some of the positive emotions, maybe some resiliency? What are some of the positive emotions that are starting to develop from COVID? I always like to look at the silver lining. I always tell my patients, well, let's find the silver lining in this situation. There aren't many these days, but there really are some. Dr. Santoro, can you speak a little bit to that?
Well, I think we've a lot of it. I think depending on everyone's individual situation, it's going to be different, but the silver lining can be that this has forced us to slow down, that maybe we're being kinder to each other, that we're finding our strength and resilience, right? We're trying to tap into that. I think a lot of people can't believe that they've been able to tolerate largely this lockdown world we're living in for 6 weeks now at this point, and have figured out how to be flexible in it. So I think we should really pat ourselves on the back. We've been able to be flexible with ourselves, with the people close to us, that we found some kindness and some connectedness in all of this, that we recognize we can get through things together. So I think some of that, and really to feel in many ways like the silver lining, recognizing, of course, that there's huge struggles people are having, is we are slowing down. People are slowing down. People are recognizing that, in some ways, a lot of things are functioning, a lot of things aren't, but many things are functioning when we're not like working ourselves into a tizzy, 12+ hour work days, some things are still working anyway. So I hope that some of that resonates for some of you.
Yeah, it's always good to remember that you know, from difficult times, definitely, you know, we can develop some strength and resiliency, and kindness, I think, is something that's really important right now to remember as well. Now, I know that we don't have a crystal ball. Sometimes I wish we did, but you know, at some point there will be reentry happening, you know, into our jobs, into schools, into, you know, just going to a restaurant. And I think that might provide or that some people can feel very anxious about that. Robyn, is there anything that you can comment on this? I think this is something that we're really going to have to continue to work through as we slowly re-enter, but do you have any tips or recommendations?
I think that it's going to be very individual for each person to take your own scenario into consideration and to do what you feel comfortable with, to look at where your comfort level comes from, to look at, is it based in today? Is it based in anxiety? Is it based in fear? Is it based in depression that you either had before or you developed during COVID, and that you're going to have a hard time getting back to a regular routine, right? This is going to be different. None of us know, you know, I deal with this question a lot. How am I going to deal with the anxiety? I think that it's going to be figuring out, what do we do? How do we feel safe? What are the things that we can best do? And I think that from a mental health perspective, just staying grounded, taking care of ourselves in the ways that we've learned self-care that don't require, you know, getting a massage or getting your nails done. They're only things that you're now doing sort of for yourself, going for a walk, you know, being with friends, virtually, really feeling connected. But I think the worries about reentry are, from a mental health perspective, how to ground yourself and take care of yourself. From your perspective, from a physical health, I leave that up to you physicians to guide us as to what is best for us to do and the precautions to take, and how to keep ourselves safe.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of, you know, we learn something new week by week, and that's what I tell people. You know, our recommendations are constantly changing. Every week we seem to learn something new. But you know, in terms of you know, staying safe, this is a good segue into reentry, because at Northern Virginia Family Practice, we are going to be entering a whole new office, and I see it as almost a new phase of you know, of this practice. And I just want to reassure our patients that after we do move, again, that's May 15th, but after we do move, we will be slowly opening up our practice again, bringing in some patients. But the way that we're going to control this and keep this safe for everybody is that we're really going to limit the number of people that we're bringing in. Telemedicine will be continuing. So people who do not feel safe coming in or have maybe chronic medical problems where they can't, that will be continuing. So we'll be able to reach out for you there. Just to let you know, the new space that we have is really big. It's beautiful. It's really big. We actually have 3 waiting rooms. So we'll be able to keep people, you know, pretty physically distanced, not social, physically distanced, to protect themselves. Everybody will be wearing masks. We'll be asking people to wash their hands. We have cleaning protocols in place. So just to let people know that, you know, reentry is something that we're taking very seriously, but we want to provide a safe place. Part of what I think is so hard about reentry is we just feel very out of control. And you know, feeling out of control with what other people are doing. Really, all that we can do is control what we're doing. But you know, anything that we can do here at our practice to make you feel safer, you know, we're really trying to do that for you. And again, week by week, we'll be letting you know which you know, if you can schedule in-office visits versus telemedicine, that will be coming. So thanks everybody for your patience. So we're going to be getting ready to wrap things up. It's 1 o'clock, but before we go, I was thinking it'd be good. We're talking about a lot of heavy things here, is maybe ground ourselves a little bit before we say goodbye. Robyn, would you mind just helping us out with maybe a breathing or just something to ground ourselves?
Sure. So we only have a couple minutes. So I would just ask everyone if they could to just for a minute, just notice you're sitting in a chair, your feet are on the ground, maybe just really allowing yourself to slow down, to calm your nervous system, to take a deep breath, let it out, and just notice that today, here, we are all together. We are all doing this at the same time, and you are not alone.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Robyn and Dr. Santoro, both of you, thank you so much for being here today. This is, you know, just your insight is so helpful. And I appreciate also just the collegiality and the collaboration that we've had over the years. And I look forward to, you know, continuing to look to you for your great knowledge in mental health. One last thing, so we're wrapping up today. Dr. Zweig will be coordinating next week's town hall meeting, and I'm going to let him introduce that really quick.
Thank you, Cecily, and thank you, Dr. Santoro and Robyn. That was great. That was hopefully very helpful for everybody. Yeah, so I'm very excited for next week. A mentor of mine, Dr. Anthony Casolaro, who is a pulmonologist, is going to come speak with us. And obviously that's something that I think everybody has on their mind because that's where COVID really impacts people with the most morbidity and mortalities in the lungs. So he's going to come and talk to us. Dr. Casolaro is an amazing guy. He is currently the lead physician for the Washington Redskins. He is also the head of the NFL Physicians Association and has been the physician referral source for pulmonology to the White House for the last 20-some years, so multiple administrations. He's got great experience. He's a wonderful speaker, and I'm really thrilled and happy that he agreed to join us for next week. So hopefully you can make it for that.
Yep. So anyway, so that's it for today. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. It's great to see you. I'm so happy you are continuing to join us here at the town halls, and we'll hopefully see you next week. Okay, bye-bye.